Group Policy Troubleshooting Tools. Have you ever had to unexpectedly take care of something that you didn't think you would have to do, but that somebody else was going to do? I know that recently happened to me. Last night, my wife decided to take me and my entire family out to dinner, and she let me pick. She says, "I'm taking you out to dinner. Which restaurant would you like to go to?" So I thought, great, I'll select the Outback restaurant, where it is my favorite restaurant. And I picked a nice steak, and I had a delicious steak, and I had a plate of crab legs, and everything was really delicious, and I thought, it's even better because of the fact that I don't have to pay for all of this. Well, then the check arrived, and she kind of just gave me a blank look, as if she were saying, "Well, aren't you going to pick that up?" So I spoke up, and I said, "Hey, wait a minute. I thought you said you were taking me to dinner. That means you pay." And she says, "Well, I don't have any money." Whew, all right, great. So I ran up my own bill. But hey, I guess it all comes out of the same pot anyway, huh? Well, it's kind of like that with policy as well. Sometimes things aren't going to go as expected. Most of the time it really works pretty well, but there's going to be times when you do have to run into a troubleshooting scenario, and it might be something that somebody else has done with the policies, maybe another administrator or something, and we're going to look here at some troubleshooting tools that will help you to resolve group policy object problems. And also, by the way, I don't have an introductory whiteboard because this is exactly what would be on it, and I'm using this to teach off of, so rather than using an introductory, I'll just talk about each item and check them off as we go. The first thing we'll address here, though, is the scope of management. That's one of the first things that will trip you up if you're running into troubleshooting scenarios. Very often, troubleshooting is actually something that's very simple or where just a human error was made. Most of the time, it's not some esoteric problem or some random weird thing that just happened. A lot of times it's because of a misconfiguration or a misunderstanding about how something is supposed to work. Policies might not be applying the way you think they are, that they should be, because you've configured them in an incorrect way, or someone else in your organization has configured them in an incorrect way. Oh, and that reminds me of something else as well when I talk about someone else in your organization. With group policy, normally it's a good idea to have a limited set of administrators that are responsible for it and that communicate well with one another when they decide to change or create a policy. Because otherwise, the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing, and you could potentially wind up with cross purposes in your group policy infrastructure. But the scope of management is where I started here, and this is really a big deal here in making sure that things work out well. And now, one of the things there is to remember your scope of management, which is going to start off with a local group policy. Okay, so that'll be a local policy that you'll have. Then you'll have a multiple local group policy object item. And remember, that's going to include any local policies that you have. And then in order of precedence, from lowest to highest, it's going to be non-admins. And then it's going to be admins. And then it's going to be users, a specific user account. And this is also going to be only local user accounts. Also with MLGPOs, you can only work with either non-admins or administrators, and you cannot work with some other group that you've created, for example, an Active Directory, or even in the local system. So you can only work with non-admins, admins, or a specific local user account. And then, of course, we'll run into our more common scenario in a corporation. Normally, in corporations, we don't work with these very often. So normally, we'll start our troubleshooting scope of management by thinking about the site, domain, okay, and then there was our organizational unit. And we saw this in a previous nugget. This is just a quick review here. And then there would be any sub-OUs. So if you have any sub-levels of OUs there, sub-OUs, then that would be the highest priority. Okay, so we start off from the lowest, going through here, again, the lowest priority up to the highest priority. And that would be the OU, in this case, that contains the user and or the computer account. And that's another important thing to remember too, and that is where that user or computer account is. So for example, if I apply a policy to the Phoenix OU, and I want the policy to apply to all of my users in the Phoenix OU, then I have to make sure that my users are in the Phoenix supervisors or Phoenix users organizational units, and then by order of inheritance, that policy will flow down to those users. But if I took one of my supervisors and I transferred them over to Tucson, for example, then what I would see happen here is this user now is in Tucson, and you can see that I'm dragging them over to Tucson users. This simply tells me that can cause something to stop working, such as a group policy, and that's exactly what could happen. Now, once this user is in Tucson, they're no longer subject to a policy linked to Phoenix, and therefore they might now become, a renegade user. Or they might have privileges that they are not supposed to have, or they might have something taken away or given to them that's unintentional. So that's just another thing to keep in mind. Remember, you have to make sure that the user and or the computer account is in, oops, that's not where I want it to go, is in the correct location. Okay? All right. Another really good tool that we have here is something called the Resultant Set of Policy Console, or MSC. The RSOP.MSC tool is something that you can just run from a Vista machine. You do have to have administrative privilege for it, but just type RSOP.MSC and press enter, and then once you would allow a user account control, it'll analyze the existing user account against the local computer and see what policies will apply to this user on this computer. So if we go down to our, for example, our user configuration, administrative templates, we'll see what kind of policies are going to apply. We can do the same under the computer configuration as well. Now, the advantage of this, using this tool, is that it only shows you the policies that are actually applying. Notice that we only see Start Menu and Taskbar items right now, and we have those things where we're removing music from the Start Menu because I changed permissions back to authenticated users offline here. In our last video, I think we had it apply to a single user only. Now it's applying to all authenticated user, which includes me as the trainer. And by the way, don't think that administrators are exempt from this, because we're also authenticated users, so it still applies to us. And then we can remove the clock from the system notification area. That's just another policy that I set up. I put that in the default domain policy. I don't very often touch the default domain policy just because I like to leave it in kind of a known good state or a pristine state. But for small stuff like this, it's probably not too bad. And then the remove music policy was the other GPO name that we had there. By the way, why do I remove the clock from the system notification area? Well, that's because, I don't know if you're aware of this, but sometimes I'll be recording and the phone will ring, or in my case, it vibrates. So the phone will vibrate and I'll have to pause recording and talk to somebody for 20 minutes or something like that. And it will just look kind of strange for the clock to jump ahead 20 seconds right in the middle of a recording. And then, of course, the other reason why I take the clock away from down there is because I don't want people to know that I go to lunch for 2 hours sometimes. See, there's no way for anybody to know. All right, so anyway, now we have those two things that we've put on there. Now, another thing that I could do is I could analyze this against a different user as well if I want. I can right-click here and choose Change Query. And then from here, I specify whether I want to run the query against this or another computer, and you can just browse for it or type in the name of the computer. I'll just stick with this computer for the time being. And then I click on Next, and it allows me to specify the current user, which is kind of redundant because that's what I just did. Or I could specify a different user here. Now, this does use information in the cached profile for that user. That's why I only see users that have logged on in the past and not all the users that are in the domain. For example, remember I have Phoenix Super 01, Phoenix Super 02, and some other accounts that don't even appear here. This can also be, by the way, stale information, because this will show you what policies applied to this user the last time that they logged on and received policy. So it could potentially be stale. Just be aware of that. But you'll at least get a thumbnail idea of what's going to go on there. Then we click on Next. And Next. Now, if you do get stale information, I'm going to show you in a moment here a way to make sure that you get current information. But for our purposes right now, as I finish the wizard, notice that under Administrative Templates, we're going to see a couple of policies apply. And that is this remove music icon from the start menu, because I changed the permissions back to authenticated users there. I think it used to be just Phoenix Super 02 or something like that. And then remove clock from the system notification area, which I've already described. So those are the policy settings that I have here. Now, also, if I want to, if I notice there's been a change, or maybe the policy is refreshed for this user since I ran this, then I could right-click on this and also choose Refresh Query, and it runs it through the whole thing again. Now, let me show you another thing here as well. This is a trick that not many people are aware of. This is not an exam issue, I don't think, but it's kind of cool. If I go back to Change Query, notice that I could choose, again, this or another computer or whatever I want to do. But normally we just click on Next, don't we? But look where this has taken us. Normally when we start a wizard, it takes us at the beginning of the wizard, but not this wizard. This one kind of takes us a step in. if I click the back button, look what I've got now. Wow, that's interesting. Logging mode or planning mode. Logging mode is what we've been doing, where we just see what happens to a specific user and computer. Planning mode will simulate a policy implementation. And what this could do is say, what happens if I were to take this user and change their security group membership? Or if they were to have a different organizational unit, maybe they were going to move them to a different OU, what would their policy look like then? And that way I can simulate what would happen to that user in advance without actually limiting their functionality or causing something to break. So this is kind of a what-if scenario, and then I just click Next. And you can specify which container you're trying to check against, so for example, an OU, or a given user account if you want, Phoenix Super 01, let's say, and then which computer they want to log on to, Vista Client 01, and then you can just click on Next, and the data is invalid. Oh, and that's what I did. I forgot to put in the name of the domain there. I did that to teach you people a lesson. Don't forget to put the domain in here like this, Nuggets Lab / and then again down here for the computer, Nugget Lab / I think I spelled it all right. And then we click on Next. And then we can specify some other conditions. I'm not going to elaborate on that for the time being because it's well beyond our scope. But sometimes policies will process differently, for example, on slow connections or something else called loopback processing, which is where it can kind of double apply a policy. And it applies user policies to computers. It's kind of weird, but that's one of the things that you can do. Again, I'm going to skip this extended error information just because I want to avoid the time delay that takes. And then when I click on Finish, we can see what would happen with Phoenix Super 01 on Vista Client 01. And it's not going to be a big surprise here because, I think we have the same settings anyway. But this would really be a cool way to identify what happens if a user changes departments so that they get moved to a different OU, or they take their laptop to a different department, and what happens if their laptop gets moved into a different OU, and so forth. And then, again, as I said, we have pretty much the same policies anyway. Now then, returning here to the Group Policy Management Console, or the GPMC, let's go back down here as well to the Group Policy Results and Modeling. This is pretty much the same thing as I showed you in the RSOP. Just the Group Policy Results, I right-click, choose Group Policy Results Wizard, Next, specify this or another computer, Next, which user I'm interested in, Next, and that's pretty much it. So it's really the same wizard, it just appears in a different way, and it gives you a different report, or a different view of the report for how it works. Here on the Summary tab, it'll show you which specific applied group policy objects took place, and which denied ones took place here as well, and why. For example, it did not give me any local group policy. Why? Because there's nothing in it. Okay. There's another policy that I have there. I didn't even remember that I created that one, but I never configured it for anything, so it's just empty. So that's the reasons why this one didn't particularly apply. Oh, that's right. I don't know what that one is. The Enable Remote Administration item, if you use a firewall, it does open up ports to allow me to remotely administer a distant computer or a remote computer. And there are no user configuration settings, so that one's empty. But I'll tell you what, if I go up to the computer configuration and look at the group policy objects, that's actually a computer configuration setting to open up the remote administration. So if I look at applied GPOs, we'll see here enable remote administration does indeed apply there. And then you can also see, what settings apply and what's there. So if I look at security settings, Windows firewall, we see here that we have the exact policy that I was talking about. Except that this particular location just tells us to look at the actual setting itself. The one I was trying to get to, and I clicked the wrong thing, is this Network Connections Windows Firewall Domain Profile, and there it is. That's where it will allow inbound remote administration exceptions. Okay. All right, so that's the way that kind of thing works. Also, if you have any group policy events, they will show up right here. And this, fortunately, I just get mostly informational messages, which tells me, folder redirection took place or something like that. So you can see that sort of thing here. Sometimes if the folder is unavailable, or if I tried to apply the policy when the share was not available, you might get a message something like this. So you get different messages that might be helpful to you in troubleshooting there. And I would remain here and show you some other things, but there's better event logging that I'm going to show you here in a little while. And then the group policy modeling, again, is also much the same as the other thing I just showed you in the RSOP. I can just start the wizard here and then click Next. And it does, again, the same kind of thing. The only difference here is it also allows me to select which domain controller I want to run the results against. It doesn't really matter for my purposes. But from this point forward, the wizard's the exact same thing as I showed you earlier, so you've got that as well. Another thing I like about running this from within the Group Policy Management console is that it does save the results right here. So if I close this, and let me minimize some stuff, and then open it back up again, we'll see that that exact same query will still remain there. And if I've made some changes or I've moved that user somewhere or something like that, again, all I have to do now is to rerun the query, and it's pretty cool there. In fact, this time it says that it's not available, so I would have to rerun it. But at least I would not have to go next, finish all over again. Just right-click, rerun, generates a report, and you're done. Now, another tool I really like is one called GPO Tool, and let me show you what that one's about. That's not a tool that you run on the on XP machines or Vista machines. For example, if I try to run it right here, then GPO Tool, it doesn't run because it's not a tool that's included with Windows Vista. So you run that on a server. So I go to my server here, I go to a command prompt, and the advantage of the GPO Tool is that it checks the overall health of your policies. Sometimes it's possible, for example, for them to get out of sync. There might have been a change in Active Directory, but for some reason, the sysvol ADM files or other sysvol data that accompanies that policy might not have gotten properly updated. If they get out of sync, there's really not a whole awful lot you can do, quite frankly. But I'll just show you what the tool is first. GPO Tool. And what we want to see here is policy OK. That's the good news, okay? And this will tell us the friendly name of the policy as well as the GUID of the policy. And that might be useful because I showed you earlier where the folder structure for this is underneath the sysvol. And you might need to go to the actual policy itself and look at the ADMs or something like that. So anyway, we're looking pretty good for this. You can also do a GPO tool in a verbose method, GPO tool verbose. And that gives you even more detail about it, you know, when it was created and when it was changed the last time and some other information like that. Now, if you do get an error message, then you're not going to see policy OK, and you'll see some additional verbose information in here that'll identify an error to you. And if that's the case, very often with these, there's not much you can do. At least you know which policy is giving you a problem, and then you can go back into your Group Policy Management console. Let me go back to my policies here. And then you can say, well, let's just pretend that it was, you know, this one, the Prevent Webcam one. The best thing to really do is just right-click and choose Delete and get rid of it. Hopefully you've also documented what settings were in it, or you can go through and look at it. Oh, that reminds me, by the way, this is not an exam issue, but this is possibly the most useful thing you can get out of Group Policy Management, and that is the backup function. We never used to have that until we had the GPMC tool, but just briefly, I'm going to be quick with this because it's not part of our exam, but it's very important. You just right-click on this and then choose Manage Backups, which is kind of weird because I haven't created any yet. But my point here is I could manage backups or I could choose Backup All. Okay, so I'll just choose Backup All, and then I'll specify a file location, and then I'll just go to, I don't know, Drive D, I guess. Drive D, and I'll just call a folder here called GPO Backup. Okay? And then I'll click OK. And then I can give a description if I want to. I'm just going to leave that blank for the time being. But you just click OK and OK past all of this. And from that point forward, then you can right-click on your group policy objects and choose Manage Backups and restore one or all of the policies that you've backed up. So if you do have a corrupt policy of some kind, you might be able to recover it by just restoring it from backup. And then once it's done backing them up, it'll give you a message here saying that it successfully backed them up, or if there were any problems. Looks like we're okay there, so you just click OK. And then you right-click here and choose Manage Backups, and you can also show only the latest version of each GPO. This would then show me the latest backup that I had created, and you know, maybe I wanted to restore this particular policy. I could then click on Restore. And if I'm not really sure, because I'm not sure if it has the settings that I was looking for there, then what I could do is choose View Settings, and then it will actually show me, much like we saw in the GPMC, the actual settings that are involved in this, and it shows me it will restrict that USB plug-and-play ID. So it's pretty cool little tool and a good way to back up and restore your policies. Now, as glossy and fancy as the GPMC tools are for the resultant set of policy and RSOP, I don't really use this tool very much anymore because those other tools that I've already been showing you seem to me to be better. But Microsoft will probably want you to know that you can run GP result. So I can go to a command line here, and I'll just type GP result and press enter, and this just identifies the basic policies that will apply to me, what security groups I was a member of at the time they applied, things like this, and it shows us that the default domain policy and the remove music apply, and that's pretty much it for the user settings. Up here, higher up, we should see, other additional things if we want to relating to the computer configuration. So anyway, those are just kind of things that we will see with this. We could also do it in a more verbose method if you want to, GP result space / and you would think that you type in V for verbose, but you can actually type in Z. I guess that's for super verbose or super verbose, and that will show you all available information that this tool is able to derive for the policy. And then again, I'm not going to exhaust this, but you can kind of run it on your own and see the kinds of things that are available there. And it's just another tool that we can use. Now, there are also logs that are available, and in Windows Vista, this has really taken a big step forward. And the first place we can go here for our logs is the system log. Now, this will just give us rudimentary information about group policy. If we need to get into more depth, we'll go to operational or debugging. But I've already opened computer management and parked it in the window in the system tools, event viewer, Windows logs, and system. And if you just look, you'll see that there's a group, if I can expand that out a little bit, a group policy source. I just went to the first one that appears here, and it simply tells you rudimentary information. The group policy settings for the user were processed successfully. So, kind of handy information there. Tells me that the policy setting did properly apply. Now, I'm not going to exhaust this right now because it's something for another day, but we can also filter the current log if we wanted to. And by doing that, over here, I can filter against a certain event ID, for example. So 1503, I think, was the event ID that we were looking at just a moment ago there. So I could filter against that and click OK. And now it's only going to show me items with event ID 1503. And you can see we've got, there's probably a dozen items right there. Actually, I guess it tells us right at the top. There's 9 of them, okay? I was off by 3, folks. So then I can clear the filter when I'm done with that. Now then, the other log here we have is something called the operational log, and if you're used to Windows XP in 2003, then this is something that replaces the user env log that we've had in the past. That used to be a log that you would turn on by using a registry value. Now it's just included by default, so you don't have to scrounge around for it, and I'll just go to computer management. Excuse me, wrong place. Computer management. And here we see where I've browsed down to this location. And let me just show you where it is located. It's under System Tools, Event Viewer, Application and Services Logs, Microsoft Windows, then you go down to Group Policy, and finally, Operational. Now, this is also just going to identify a lot of the different things that have happened with policy. It's a lot more verbose than the log I just showed you just a moment ago in the system log. But this will show you more detail about what's been going on and so forth. So just another location to identify. For example, here it even told me that it completed processing of the policy in 4 seconds, if that matters for anything. Okay, so that's that particular log, the operational event log. Now then we also have another log here called the debugging log, and what this does is it's going to create a file called gpedit.log, and every time you modify or edit group policy objects, then it's going to create data in that log file for you. This is going to be extremely verbose information. It's almost more programmatic in terms of the debugging of it. I don't really see a lot of purposes for normal network administrators to be able to have to use this, but Microsoft may want you to know about it, so I'm going to go ahead and point it out to you. The first thing you'll do here is you need to turn it on, and you do that by going to the registry, and I've already entered this in at a point in the past, regedit. So just go to a start run or something and type regedit. And then with administrative permission, we'll continue. And you can see here where I've gone to WinLogon, and then I've entered in the gpedit debug level value here. And you can see that what you'll do with this is this won't be here by default. And you can look at my statement or my status line down here at the bottom to identify my current location. Under HK Local Machine Software, Microsoft, Windows NT, current version, and WinLogon, you just go to this particular value, which you'll have to create yourself. It's a 32-bit D-word value. So you'll right-click and choose Create there, and then it's going to give you a value here of 10002 in hex, or 65,538. 538 here in decimal. Okay, so there's my value. Now, once I've done that, if I go back into the Group Policy Management console and I just work with any policy, it doesn't really matter which one, but I'll just use this Remove Music one. Let's say I right-click there and choose Edit, and maybe I just change my mind and I want to give everybody the ability to get back the music link on their Start menu, because look, right now we still don't have it. And so then I'll go to Start Menu and Taskbar, and where is that policy? Here it is, Remove Music icon. So I'll just go back to Not Configured, let's say here, and I'm just going to refresh the policy up here as well, GP Update. It doesn't really log the updating of it, but it does update. It does monitor anytime I've edited the policy. Now, all I did was edit that one little policy and make one little change, and look, it logged 344 kilobytes worth of data, which for a text file is quite a bit of data. And so you can see here where this is pretty much pretty close to being a programmatic function. So if you're writing applications that need to work with certain policies or something, this is probably going to be a lot more useful to you. This is extremely verbose, and again, in my opinion, for most normal administrators, we don't really have much use for this, but Microsoft might want you to know about it. Now finally then, I want to show you a tool called DCGPO Fix. I don't think this is going to appear on the exam because it's a Windows Server 2003 tool, and it doesn't even appear on Vista. But I want to show it to you anyway because it's very useful if you run into an emergency situation where the default domain policy or the default domain controller's policy has been hopelessly fiddled with. Maybe you've got somebody that came in, a summer intern or something, and they decided to experiment with it, and it becomes very difficult to backtrack back to the original settings of those policies. And here's the policies: the default domain policy, default domain controller's policy. Those are there by default, and there's no way to delete them. In fact, if I try to delete this right now, look what happens. You want to delete this and everything, okay? And it failed. It just, the server is unwilling to process the request. It's like a belligerent 2-year-old. It just won't do it, okay? That's okay, though, because you actually have to have, just by the architecture and structure of Active Directory, you have to have both of these policies. But if they're corrupt and totally messed up, then I have to have something that's going to totally mess me up. So I don't like that. So what I can do here is go to a command prompt and type a tool called DCGPO Fix. And I'll just do a !question so you can see the various parameters here. But what this does is it will restore both of those policies back to their original out-of-the-box configuration if I needed to do that. Let's just go ahead and do it. DCGPO Fix, and then I could do a space. And then what I could do is also a target, but I'm going to just leave it the way it is right now. And if I don't type in any parameters, it will just replace both of those with the default values. Now I'm also going to get an error here, and I'll show you why. This tool was originally developed under an Active Directory schema. That's kind of the skeletal structure of Active Directory. It developed it underneath the schema version 30. But you see, I've installed Windows Server 2003 R2. R2 increments the schema to version 31. Therefore, there's a schema mismatch. This is a benign error for our purposes, even though it's all red and it looks very alarming. What we can do with this is to just do a / ignore schema and press enter. And it says, all right, do you want to continue? Yes. And do you want to continue again? Yes. And that's pretty much it. Then it's going to restore both of those policies back to their default configuration, and hopefully at least we get back down here now to a known state, and so that those policies aren't messed around with anymore. So even though I didn't really use an introductory whiteboard, let me just conclude with what we've got here to kind of review what we had. We had the troubleshooting tools to keep in mind. Remember, the big one here is the scope of management. That's where you just got to use the common sense of knowing how your policies apply. So keep those things in mind. It'll help keep your sanity, and you won't be needlessly chasing down elaborate or complicated troubleshooting schemes when it could really be something very simple. So I'd say, a good 60 or 70% of the time it has something to do with the scope of management. The resultant set of policies is a pretty cool graphical user interface tool that we can use to identify which policies apply to a user and computer. GPO tool is also another tool that we can use to identify the health of our policies and see if there's any corruption in them. Again, I don't think that's going to appear on the exam, but it's a really cool tool. There's also GP Result. This is simply another tool that we can run from a command line, however. I like other tools better, but GP Result is a command line tool that you can get verbose information out of. Then we took a look at the various logs that are available. System gives you rudimentary information. Operational is very detailed. Debugging is so detailed that it's, in my opinion, practically impractical for most administrators, but probably these first two are going to be more useful to you. And then finally, we took a look at DC GPO fix, which again I don't think is an exam issue, but a very handy tool to know about. And that's the tool that will repair your default domain policy and your default domain controller's policy and set them back to their default settings. Well, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.